here. Perfect. Now we're live. There's an opportunity for them to speak, but I'll wait until I see those. Otherwise, I think we can. So Breck Bowden asked if we could switch the agenda up a little so that the presentation from Claire could happen as soon as possible. So I'll wait for a motion, but I fully support that, and
I'll move. So moved. I'll move to change the agenda around.
Perfect. Any discussion about that? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So with that, I think we can transition right over to Claire's presentation. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Great, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to speaking with all of you this evening. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Oh, Mary, is it possible for me to share screen, or do you want to run the slides?
Let me see if I can get you permission. This is the LCBP Zoom account, so I just need to see if I can make it work.
Okay. Sorry, I should have confirmed that beforehand.
Mary, you might be able to make her the host, and then she can share her screen, like in the little dots after her name on participants.
Okay. Did that work, Claire?
Yes, thank you. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah.
All right, great.
Yep.
All right, thanks for having me this evening. My name is Claire Madden. I'm the Tracking and Accounting Supervisor for the Clean Water Initiative program, and I'm going to be presenting today on the Clean Water Initiative Annual Performance Report and how the state approaches tracking, accounting, and reporting on water quality progress. Familiar to all of you, but just by way of a little bit more introduction, the Clean Water Initiative program is within the Water Investment Division of the Department of Environmental Conservation at the state's Agency of Natural Resources. And our program has a three-part mission. We align and coordinate statewide clean water efforts, develop financial and technical resources to support clean water work, and capture, assess, and communicate the progress and impact of clean water investments across the state. The report that we're discussing today is a primary function of the third piece of our mission. It helps to provide transparency and accountability on state investments in clean water, and is also an important adaptive management mechanism to inform programmatic development to fill gaps and further our progress. For today's presentation, I'll start with a little bit of a background on Vermont's approach to water quality protection and restoration at the state, and some of the details around the Lake Champlain TMDL and the state's approach to tracking and accounting. This may be a reminder for many of you, but I think it's helpful to provide that framework and sort of context as a starting point for the data that I'll be presenting later in the report or later in the presentation from this year's performance report. I'll touch on the role of all of the partners working in this space, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. So as you all know, Vermont prioritizes the protection and restoration of water quality for a lot of reasons. We rely on clean water as a source of drinking water. It supports recreation, tourism, and local economies, provides really important aesthetic and quality of life values, and supports habitat ecosystem preservation, among other benefits. And for the most part, we're really lucky to live in a state with clean and healthy lakes, rivers, and streams. Some of our water bodies are not of a quality we might hope, and Many of the water quality impacts in Vermont are the result of excess sediment and nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen within the ecosystem. An overabundance of the sediment and nutrients in our waterways can lead to undesirable water quality impacts. Maybe most prevalent among them is the cyanobacteria blooms or blue-green algae blooms, which impact Lake Champlain and many other water bodies across the state. And in order to address these water quality challenges, Vermont has clean water restoration plans, which are called total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, that outline the amount of a pollutant that a water body can withstand while still meeting the state's water quality standards. So you can think of a TMDL sort of like a clean water budget. The map on the left side of the screen shows the spatial coverage of the state's large-scale TMDLs. The Lake Champlain Basin, where we'll be focusing this evening, is in the dark green and has a phosphorus TMDL. The Lake Memphremagog Basin is shown in light green, also has a TMDL for phosphorus. And Vermont is one of 5 states that's part of a nitrogen TMDL to address hypoxia and dead zones in the Long Island Sound. So you can see the Connecticut River drainage on the eastern side of the state, and blue on the map is the section of the state that's part of that nitrogen TMDL for the Long Island Sound. The thinner black lines on the map also show the 15 tactical planning basins in Vermont. I'll touch on this a little bit more in a couple of slides, but the state uses the tactical basin planning process to identify the sources and causes of water quality challenges, and then prioritize actions to address those challenges. For a little bit of background on why we, in the Clean Water Initiative program, do all of the tracking, accounting, and reporting that we do. In 2015, the state legislature passed Act 64, also known as Vermont's Clean Water Act. And this legislation was prompted in large part by requirements from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to address phosphorus imbalances across the state and meet the state's obligations to restore water quality in Lake Champlain. Act 64 set up expanded systems of regulation and enforcement of non-point sources of water pollution, established the Clean Water Fund to provide a financial mechanism to accomplish the work of protecting and restoring Vermont's waters against degradation, and initiated the accountability and transparency requirements that the state track, account, and report on progress in water quality improvements that have been supported through state investments. A few years later, in 2019, the state legislature passed the Clean Water Service Delivery Act, or Act 76, which built on Act 64 by establishing a long-term clean water funding source and revising clean water priorities. It also restructured the administration and implementation of some of the state's clean water funds and established new grant programs along with new reporting requirements to assess and report on the effectiveness of those grant programs. In addition to these state statutory reporting requirements, the state of Vermont also reports to EPA on the status of implementing the large-scale water quality restoration plans, or TMDLs, that I mentioned earlier in the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog basins. So we accomplish all of these reporting expectations through a single annual report, the Vermont Clean Water Initiative Annual Performance Report. I mentioned the tactical basin planning process earlier, and it really is a foundational piece to clean water work across the state. It's led by the Watershed Planning Program within DEC. And the tactical basin planning process assesses the primary causes and sources of water pollution challenges, identifies actions to address those challenges, engages with the public, and considers stakeholder input in order to identify actionable and strategic opportunities to address water quality challenges at a local and regional or watershed scale. So the tactical basin planning process provides a roadmap for the network of clean water partners working across the state to engage in and act on clean water opportunities that have been prioritized, have funding support, and have technical resources available to support all the way from project identification through implementation and maintenance. The tactical basin planning process occurs on a 5-year rotating cycle, And each tactical basin plan uses an adaptive management approach to assess progress, identify gaps, and establish strategies to further clean water progress. So the data that we collect for the annual reporting process is pretty important to informing the cyclical basin planning process as well. The Lake Champlain TMDL covers a really large area, and the basin loading is dominated by non-point sources of pollution. So non-point source, basically diffuse sources of pollution that aren't necessarily originating from a pipe or the end of a collection system, and are more difficult, tend to be more difficult to regulate because of the diffuse nature of the source of pollution. So reaching the Lake Champlain TMDL requires a combination of regulatory actions and non-regulatory voluntary project implementation. And in order to provide assurance of the state's capacity to address water quality challenges in the Lake Champlain Basin, an accountability framework was established along with the Lake Champlain TMDL, which requires interim and final reporting to EPA on water quality progress at the basin scale on a 5-year cycle. So the map on the left of this slide shows the accountability framework timeframes for phase 3 of the TMDL implementation plan. Essentially, the 5-year cycle starts with the basin planning process, and then an interim report is submitted 2 or 3 years later on how the state is progressing on achieving the strategies and objectives outlined in the tactical basin plan. And a final report sort of assesses the effectiveness of that set of strategies and informs the next planning process. Again, Watershed Planning Program in DEC leads the drafting of these basin-specific reports that are included in the performance report, and EPA reviews them to assess our progress. All right, getting into just a little bit more in the Lake Champlain TMDL. This was a very model-heavy technical process to put into place, and often brings to mind the saying that might be familiar to some of you. I should have looked up who said this originally, but I'll replicate without citing my source. The saying is, all models are wrong, but some are useful. I think this is really true with the Lake Champlain TMDL. The TMDL establishment required lots of data aggregation, assumptions, and some generalizations and standardization. And it's a really useful tool in assessing progress and tracking the state's overall trajectory towards reaching the goals set by the TMDL, but we acknowledge the ultimate indicator of success in achieving water quality restoration is, of course, still the results of water quality monitoring data. What the TMDL does is it identifies phosphorus reductions required in order for Lake Champlain to meet water quality standards, and EPA played a really large role in supporting the modeling and technical analysis in order to determine the TMDL baseline, or the starting point, the target, or where we're trying to get to, and the required reductions in order to achieve the targets. This modeling was all done using decades of water quality monitoring data that has been collected by the state of Vermont and the Lake Champlain Basin Program through the long-term monitoring program. The state hired a consultant to model the watershed sources of phosphorus and the internal loading in the lake and lake segments. And this informed the determination of a baseline loading and the required reductions necessary to meet in-lake water quality criteria. All of the modeling that was done for the TMDL is really foundational in the phosphorus accounting systems that we use, because the tracking and reporting is intended to measure and communicate our progress towards reaching the targets that were established in the TMDL. The accounting that we use needs to have a direct link to the modeling done to set the TMDL baseline and target. As part of the TMDL development process, the Soil and Water Assessment Tool, or SWAT, was established. This estimated the annual land-based loading rates of phosphorus based on land use type, soil type, and slope for every subwatershed in the Lake Champlain Basin. And this tool gives us the baseline phosphorus loading rate for land-based loading in kilograms per acre per year. In order to ensure the TMDL targets were achievable, the state partnered with a group of consultants, sector area experts, and EPA to compile a scenario tool, basically looking at scenarios of project implementation based on a known universe of project opportunities to ensure that the targets that were set by the TMDL had a pathway to achieve through implementation of best management practices. And building off of the scenario tool, the BMP accounting and tracking tool, or BAT, sorry, a lot of acronyms, was developed to support the TMDL accountability framework. This is a calculator tool that provides estimated phosphorus reductions for many common agriculture and stormwater best management practices, or BMPs. And we're now realizing that a lot of practices that are being implemented to support water quality improvement efforts are not captured in that initial calculator tool and are requiring the development of expanded methods for tracking and accounting. We store all of the methods that we use to track and account for clean water projects on our website. They're in standard operating procedures, and those documents articulate both the tracking and accounting methods and also the data standards that are associated with this body of work. So this all sets the stage for how we approach tracking and accounting in our annual data collection and reporting process in order to report on the state's progress under the large-scale TMDLs. I've used the term tracking and accounting a lot already, so I think I'm overdue to provide definitions of what I mean by each of those terms. The tracking is the data collection, standardization, and data management procedures. Essentially, this is the set of tools that are in place to support our ability to keep track of implementation and to use our accounting methods. And the accounting piece is the estimated pollutant reduction. Right now, our accounting is focused on sediment and phosphorus reductions. These methods are developed and implemented based on industry standards. Many have been established by the EPA or USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service in the ag sector, and in some cases have been adapted from other applicable contexts, like the Chesapeake Bay program, which has a lot of great resources to draw from. We have also built on all of these resources with state-specific research, scientific research, and built Vermont-specific tools for accounting where other applicable resources didn't exist. So there's a really strong intersection between tracking and accounting. The accounting methods are set based on what is feasible to track. We want to make sure that the data requirements that we're setting up are reasonable and achievable by a wide range of partners engaging in this work. And the tracking tools, we need tracking tools in order to support the data collection that informs our accounting. Throughout this, standardization is really key to ensuring that the results that we report to EPA, to the state legislature, and to the public are defensible and robust, and have a clear tie back to the TMDL modeling that set the targets that we're aiming to achieve. In order to just provide a brief sense of what the phosphorus accounting approach looks like, it is essentially a math problem, and there's some variability to this approach, but I wanted to provide sort of the general framework for how we complete our phosphorus accounting and come up with an estimated phosphorus reduction at the practice level or at the scale of a project that has been implemented. So we start on the left side of the screen, start with the baseline load. This is a load estimated phosphorus load per acre established by the TMDL modeling, again, based on a few factors: location, land use type, soil, and slope. And then we estimate the area treated by the practice or the project that's been implemented. This can be a little bit variable depending on what the project is. The product of those two data inputs is the estimated load prior to any intervention originating from that land area that's being treated. And then we take the phosphorus load and multiply it by the reduction efficiency. This is a standardized, known or scientifically defensible reduction result. Again, generally drawing from industry standards, in some cases informed by state-specific research in order to estimate how effective essentially a given practice is at removing sediment and associated phosphorus from or intervening in that transport to our water bodies. That results in an estimated phosphorus reduction in kilograms per year, which we report in our annual reporting. And each practice also has an assigned design life or the anticipated functional lifespan of the project. And that tells us how many years of reporting the practice is anticipated to be functioning to improve water quality. Again, some of our methods vary slightly from this generalized approach, but hopefully that's helpful as sort of a first pass at how we approach the accounting piece. So the state funds projects across all land use sectors that are primarily intended to address nutrient and sediment pollution and generally function to slow down and infiltrate water before it reaches our waterways and to reduce the erosive energy of water moving across the land through improved land management strategies. And when we're tracking and reporting on clean water projects, we tend to categorize them into these 5 primary land use sectors that you see on the screen based on the type of non-point source pollution that's being addressed. And we're really lucky because all of the investments that are being made in projects to improve water quality also carry with them multiple co-benefits, some of which are could include improved habitat function and biodiversity, increased carbon sequestration, better flood resilience, improved soil health, increased public safety, and workforce development. So while we fund with a primary goal of addressing sediment and nutrient challenges, we're getting a lot more than that out of these projects. All right, thanks for bearing with me on all the details there. I'm going to share a couple of the data point results from our most recent report. We collect and report on data statewide, but the results that I'm sharing today are specific to the Lake Champlain Basin. This figure on the screen shows state investments in clean water over the reporting timeframe, organized by sector and state fiscal year. It includes all dollars administered by state agencies, as well as the dollars administered and awarded through the Lake Champlain Basin program for projects that are located within the Lake Champlain Basin. And we report on a state fiscal year cycle that runs July 1st through June 30th. Our reporting began in state fiscal year 2016 following the passage of Act 64, which again sort of started all of the transparency and reporting requirements associated with this body of work. We report on funding as it's awarded, but the results of investments are often not available in the same year as the funding award is made. There's a lag time between dollars out the door and data back on the impact or outcome of those investments. And as you can see, we're in a pretty impressive uptick in funding awards going to clean water, particularly state fiscal year 2023 and 2024. You'll see on the next slide, but this is almost entirely the result of dollars made available through the American Rescue Plan Act, and primarily being directed towards stormwater and wastewater sectors, although some American Rescue Plan Act dollars went to the Agency of Agriculture to support clean water work in the ag sector. This next figure shows the same data, but now organized by funding source, and I think really emphasizes the role that ARPA is or the American Rescue Plan Act is currently playing in funding availability. ARPA is a short-term funding source that's expected to decline in prevalence over the coming years. ARPA funds were needed to be encumbered by the end of calendar year 2024 and expended by the end of calendar year 2026. So we'll see that begin to taper off in the coming years. Other really consistent sources of funding to support this work include the Capital Bill, the Clean Water Fund, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and of course, Lake Champlain Basin Program contributions. All right, I'll move into estimated phosphorus reductions that we reported this most recent year in our report. This slide, just to recall back to the TMDL, this illustrates the modeling that set the baseline, and the TMDL load allocation is essentially the target where we'd like to be in order to achieve the state of Vermont's water quality standards in Lake Champlain. The larger of the pie charts on the right side of the screen shows the difference between the baseline and our target, and this is essentially representative of the reductions required in order to achieve the TMDL. So the net reduction in order for Vermont to achieve its share of the Lake Champlain TMDL is 212.4 metric tons per year by 2036, which is the end of the 20-year implementation timeframe for the TMDL. And you can see that various sectors have sort of different baseline loads and load allocations. I will say that achieving the targets set by the TMDL doesn't require that we achieve the reductions at the sector level. So there's some room for flexibility and to take advantage of project opportunities, but these sort of sector breakdowns do lay out a path for how we might achieve the overall reduction goal in the TMDL, which is quite sizable and will take sort of that all-in approach that the state has identified as a need from the very start and the passage of Act 64. So this set of figures shows estimated pollution reductions that we've been able to track and account for to date. The graph on the left shows estimated phosphorus reductions by state fiscal year and by sector. And the graph on the right shows the overall progress that we've made towards that 212.4 metric ton net reduction target set by the TMDL. You'll probably notice the agricultural sector as a standout continues to be reporting the largest demonstrated reductions in phosphorus in the Lake Champlain Basin. Recalling from the previous slide, it's also the sector with the largest load allocation to address in the TMDL. We do expect some growth in the estimated phosphorus reductions that we'll be able to report in other sectors in the coming years. Particularly stormwater and transportation-related stormwater sectors are more heavily in the regulatory space. There's more permits, permit programs governing water quality improvement work in those sectors, and those regulations are sort of hitting the ground now. Again, these phosphorus reductions that we're presenting represent modeled estimates. The scale of implementation across the state doesn't allow for site-specific monitoring of every practice that has been implemented to measure the results. So we use monitoring data and research to help provide the expected reduction efficiency of different types of practices and then apply that standardized approach across the suite of practices that have been implemented in order to be able to provide a picture of total progress through implementation across the basin and across the state. And one last figure for today. This is a relatively new piece of our reporting. This figure shows estimated phosphorus reductions that we reported this most recent year in the lighter purple filled in bars, and the estimated phosphorus reductions that we reported last year in the darker outlines. The reason that I'm sharing this is because I mentioned at the start of the presentation that information availability definitely drives our what we're able to report on. So this figure helps to demonstrate the data lags that we're experiencing in being able to estimate phosphorus reductions in the Lake Champlain Basin. So just focusing in on state fiscal year 2023, you can see that this most recent year, we were able to backfill a good bit of data that was not available for reporting last year and provide a more accurate representation of total estimated phosphorus reductions achieved in that year. The reason for this is mostly because of the cycle of the state fiscal year reporting. I mentioned the state fiscal year turns over on July 1st, and that is right in the middle of the best time to be doing implementation. So, you know, at least thinking like in the ag sector, July 1st is right in the middle of the growing season. The results of many of the programs that the Agency of Agriculture runs in order to protect and improve water quality are not available the year that they're being implemented. And so we backfill and sort of increase our accuracy in reporting each year. If you like data and you're interested in seeing more data, this link on the screen and the QR code here will bring you to the Clean Water Interactive Dashboard, which is where we house all of the data that's collected and compiled for our annual reporting. And it allows you to see data at different spatial scales and different sort of lenses and filters. So if that's of interest, I definitely encourage you to check out the Clean Water Interactive Dashboard. Before we wrap up, I want to bring in another piece of the work here, which is to acknowledge the role of our Clean Water Partner Network and the clean water community that really makes all of this possible. So in my role, I tend to sort of focus on data and numbers, but the work that all of our partners are doing to implement programs and support clean water is really so much more than could be represented by a data point or a graph on a screen. So in order to facilitate the Clean Water Initiative annual performance report process, we collect data from 5 different state agencies: the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, Lake Champlain Basin Program, and USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. And this is representative of over 50 programs that are administered by state agencies and affiliates to support a huge range of clean water work that's happening across scales, sectors, and geographies of the state.
May the previous 2.
And we really value and place a lot of emphasis on the important role that all the folks doing this work are providing for the state. I think I'll share one project example from a recently completed project because I think it's just really interesting and provides a great example of how time and resource intensive it can be to do this work. It's not every project is like this one, but it is, I think this is a neat project, although it's not located in the Lake Champlain Basin. This is one picture of a before on the left and after picture on the right of representing one of many components of the Valley Brook Restoration Project that's located in Morgan, Vermont, so in the Memphremagog Basin. And the project is working to reconnect tributaries to their historic flow paths, plug and fill agricultural ditches, restore wetland hydrology, and decommission some old roads that are no longer being used. Phase 1 of the work was completed in 2024, and phase 2 of the project is currently underway. And I just think this is a neat example because it shows sort of the breadth of different partners and organizations that came together to compile funding sources and get this project completed. So Organizations that were involved in the project work include the Orleans County Natural Resource Conservation District, who led the landowner outreach and discussions around farm retirement that led to all of this other project work being possible. The restoration work was designed and overseen by the Memphremagog Watershed Association, working alongside Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Environmental Conservation, Agency of Agriculture, and the Nature Conservancy. And Northwood Stewardship Center also contributed to a component of the project implementation. The funding to support this work came from the Water Quality Restoration Formula Grant that is being administered by Vermont Housing and Conservation Board in their role as the Memphremagog Clean Water Service Provider. The Nature Conservancy is a co-holder on the conservation easement and also contributed significant funding to support the project. And Vermont Fish and Wildlife, Agency of Agriculture, and Housing and Conservation Board all contributed funding as well, as the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission funding through the Great Lakes Fishery Commission was used to support capacity building and landowner outreach. So like I said, not every project is this complex or takes this many partners and this many different funding sources, but it does sort of represent how much of it can take to get this work done on the ground. And I think that's important to not lose sight of that piece of it. I'm going to wrap up here with a few closing remarks, and then definitely welcome questions and discussion around any of this. Happy to go back and revisit any of the details if that would be of interest. So we're doing a lot of impactful work and across the state in the Lake Champlain Basin. And the data availability may underrepresent all of the work that we're doing. So data reporting cycles cause some delays in data availability, and also it's really hard to deduce down all of the complex and intricate project work into a couple of data points. But we use that data to communicate progress to the legislature, to EPA, and to the public, acknowledging that the ultimate indicator of water quality improvement remains monitoring data results collected through measured water quality samples. And there's a lot of money in the space right now. So alongside all of that money, we need to really be thinking about and supporting the growth of the capacity of our network. It's critical that the state and other funders invest in the people that are doing this work, in order to make sure that we have a robust network of partners that have the tools, skills, organizational bandwidth, and knowledge to complete these projects in order to reach our collective goals. So really important that we're keeping attention towards investing and supporting a network of partners that is numerous and diverse, well-trained, and well-resourced. The state's regulatory programs that were designed under Act 64 are really hitting the ground now, and we expect meaningful results from those programs in the coming years. But regulatory programs alone won't get us to the TMDL target. We'll need this all-in approach across sectors and scales, combining progress that we can make under regulatory programs with meaningful implementation of non-regulatory voluntary projects. And particularly working in the non-regulatory space means working not only to support our partners, but to support their work in building relationships and promoting a culture of clean water among private landowners. We need a lot of these private landowners to see value in and engage with this work in order to implement projects and make progress on the non-regulatory components of the TMDL. I think I'll wrap up with that, and maybe just check for questions. See where my screen is.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was really helpful.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad it was helpful, and I feel like I kind of sped through some of that. So let me know if you'd like me to bring up a slide that I already went over and explain in more detail or anything like that. I see, Breck, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Claire, thanks for the presentation. Could you just clarify for me the development of the BAT and those elements that preceded the BAT is an impressive achievement, and thank you for reporting about all of that. There's a dashboard that's showing that we're on our way towards hitting this 212.4 metric ton per year phosphorus reduction, but that's a model reduction. And my question for clarification here is, for EPA to sign off on us having met the TMDL, it is not a matter of having shown by modeling that we've achieved the 212 metric ton target. Isn't it that we have hit the phosphorus concentration levels in the lake from the monitoring program? And if those two don't agree, what happens then?
That's a great question. It is also my understanding that the in-lake concentrations from measured water quality samples sort of will be, like I mentioned, the ultimate indicator that will let us know that we've reached our goal. The tracking and accounting that we do, because the scale of the Lake Champlain TMDL, like kind of half the state we're talking about, this is our approach to tracking incremental progress. So I mentioned the TMDL has a 20-year implementation timeframe. It's really important that we as a state are keeping tabs on how our incremental progress towards that target that was set by the TMDL, so that we can employ the adaptive management approach of assessing what we've accomplished so far, where there might be gaps, where we can work on programmatic development to support new initiatives to further progress in a particular sector, or those types of sort of mile markers, I guess I'll say, of like, where are we missing an opportunity? Where can we do more to further our progress is a piece that is informed by this modeled tracking and accounting. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
It does. Thanks, Claire. Just very quickly, is the performance report in its final form?
Yes, we publish the performance report on January 15th of every year. So I can put a link in the chat to the most recent report, which is for state fiscal year 2024. So we're not yet, the 2025 report is not yet available.
Okay, I put a link in there for those who haven't seen it.
Great.
I do have a comment, which I will write to you separately. I find a set of the graphs in here very confusing, and just have a comment about their structure, but I'll relinquish.
Thank you. Hillary.
We actually have 4 questions, but I will wait between questions. But one of mine actually is a little bit related to the question that Breck had asked. So now that we're getting a lot of flooding and a lot of results, like rainfall that looks like it's related to climate change, are we comparing progress to baseline that's sort of an average year? And if we end up with big events that put in, like double our phosphorus in 1 year, how are we subtracting some of that out so we can look at progress? Or are we accounting for this increased phosphorus? I don't think we're accounting for the increased phosphorus because the modeling's been done. So I guess I'm curious, what the thoughts are at DEC around this issue.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that's really increased in prevalence since the last couple of years of events that we've experienced as a state. I'm just going to pull up a slide here. I didn't mention it, but I do think that it might help for to have the visual. The TMDL modeling. Oops, sorry. Let's see if I can do this quickly. Okay, so I mentioned the TMDL baseline is sort of our starting point. That's based on modeling for where we were during the baseline period. The load allocation is our target, and the load allocation in the TMDL includes this margin of safety. This purple sliver in the pie chart is the margin of safety. That is sort of the buffer
Claire,
that was.
Can
Yes.
you share your screen again?
Oh, sorry about that.
It's okay.
Can you see it now? Oh, now.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
I don't use Zoom as often as I use Teams, so I hit the wrong button. Apologies. Okay, so the baseline sets the starting point, and the load allocation is the target, or where we'd like to be by the end of the TMDL period. And this sliver, the purple margin of safety, is the buffer that was built into the TMDL to acknowledge uncertainty around future loading, particularly loading associated with climate change and related severe weather events. So we are not currently tracking the loading that results from individual storm events because that would require measured phosphorus concentrations. But the TMDL did build into the modeling an assumption of how much might result in future loading associated with climate change. So that's an imperfect answer. I will say that there are other folks that are working on great analysis of the impact of storm events on loading to Lake Champlain in recent years. A lot of that actually coming out of the Lake Champlain Basin program. So the state at DEC, we also have folks that work in the monitoring assessment program and other programs within DEC that do track measured water quality data. I would love to get to a point where we're sort of merging measured and modeled and seeing how close or far apart we are between those, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, that's great. So again, so at some point you could measure that amount with the data that's being collected or estimated and then apply it against the 20.9 metric tons to see if we're passing that through weather events each year or not. That's helpful. Thank you. And I'll wait then until Allison or other people ask questions and then come back if there's.
Okay, sounds great. And maybe one other point of clarification is all of the figures that I presented here are loading per year. So 20.9 metric tons in a single year associated with climate impacts is quite a bit. It's not 20 over the 20-year lifespan. So if that's helpful. Allison.
Yeah, I would love to hear your opinion. Why has the greatest amount of phosphorus reductions happened in the agricultural sector? Is it that's where the most funding is, it's the easiest to track, or I don't know. I think I've never really heard a good explanation for that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a combination of things. We do have tracking and accounting procedures in place, well established and in place for, I think, most, if not all, of the commonly implemented agricultural practices that have funding support in the state. And part of that is because there was transferable methodologies to draw on from the national scale. So USDA NRCS really has a pretty robust framework for this type of work. And the Agency of Ag is a huge funder of clean water work, and it's a little bit out. I think that the funding figure that I showed, some other sectors appear larger, but I think the thing that I didn't show but is available to view in the Clean Water Interactive Dashboard is the cost effectiveness of agricultural practices. So while the total funding being awarded by the Agency of Ag and other folks that are funding agricultural work, it doesn't appear as like the largest chunk of the funding figure. The dollars are just really it's cost effective to do that type of practice implementation. So dollars spent per unit of phosphorus reduced is much lower than, say, in the stormwater sector. Structural stormwater best management practices tend to be pretty expensive. They require, a lot of engineering and some infrastructure that can be a lot more costly to implement. So I think those factors, along with the regulatory programs that I mentioned, it took several years after the passage of Act 64, which sort of like established the regulatory programs. It took several years to operationalize and implement those programs. So I think we'll be seeing more results from those sectors in the future. I hope that was a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Karina.
You touched on this, and I just had a few more questions because I know there are projects, examples of projects that I'm doing that aren't funded by those mechanisms that are tracking the phosphorus, and they do have phosphorus benefits, removal benefits. So I'm just wondering how we can, like, can we account for those in some way? And is there more of an increased effort to track those projects that aren't funded the same way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one limitation of our tracking is that we don't have a great system for requesting data, sort of crowdsourcing data on project implementation. So through state funding programs, we're able to build in, grant requirements that allow us to get back data that informs the accounting methods. And without that mechanism, it's more difficult to track project implementation that's happening outside of a state funding program. I would love to get to a point where we have some sort of like portal where partners could, implement project work that's being done through other funding mechanisms. We are not there yet.
Okay, and one to add on to that, and then I'll let Hillary go, is related to the FFI, the Functioning Floodplain Initiative, which I don't think you got into that, but I've noticed that, and maybe this is a separate group, but I've noticed that the calculations for the FFI have changed in the past couple of years. Like they've changed the calculations, at least for dam removal on certain projects that I've done a calculation a year ago, and now it looks different. And so I'm just wondering, I know those conversations are happening internally, but are there larger conversations about how those calculations are derived, and is there opportunity for public comment and outreach related to that?
Great question. We are working internally to improve several functions of the several pieces of the Functioning Floodplains Initiative application. The underlying methods that the Functioning Floodplains Initiative uses or sort of displays, allows for calculation, are published in the tracking and accounting standard operating procedures documents that I mentioned. And those are subject to type 3 public notice and public comment. And we have a requirement to review those documents at least once every 5 years. So we'll be doing that again, starting pretty soon here. They were published in 2022. So we're already almost halfway through, or past halfway through that 5-year mark, and we'll be revisiting those, and that would be a great opportunity to I'd like to think through stakeholder engagement and make a robust public comment opportunity through that. And I would say outside of that, if you have thoughts or questions or concerns, you can reach out to me and I'll bring that to our internal group. And I will also just raise with the internal group, like there are interested stakeholders that would like to be a part of this process, and how can we think about doing that in a structured way. It's not something that we've done before, but I think it's a good point, and we can definitely see what we can do.
Thank you. That's helpful.
All right, Hillary.
So I have a question back about one of your early slides, and you said targets set by the TMDL, you wanted to check to make sure that targets set by the TMDL were achievable based on the universe of project opportunities. And of course, South Lake is the gap watershed, so I think that it was not deemed to be achievable through that universe. And I'm kind of curious if you could go into a little detail, like I'm assuming weren't looking at like the 42 potential projects in the database, you were looking at like land use conversion, like buffering streams, assuming all ag land within 50 feet of the stream turned into forested riparian buffer and like rerunning the model. So then if that's the case, I guess moving forward in terms of current accounting, is there like for the gap watersheds, I guess, has there been any differences between those and the other watersheds in terms of achieving goals or in terms of sort of thinking forward looking as we're working on the accounting for new project types and stuff? Has that been something that's, I guess, how has that affected any of that work that you're doing now, if at all?
Yeah, so I'll just say I was not in this position or with the state at all when the TMDL was established. So I forgive me for maybe not knowing all of the details here. My understanding is that the scenario tool did sort of take the level of granularity that you described of sort of like if, hypothetical implementation scenarios. To your question about sort of the basin specific or watershed specific tracking, I think that would be a question that could be best answered by the watershed planning program because they are doing the interim and final reporting at a basin scale and sort of tacking that back to the TMDL targets. And I know that the Lake Champlain Basin, the phase 4 content, which is sort of like the 4th round of the planning and implementation, is getting much more specific about phosphorus reductions achieved to date, anticipated phosphorus reductions through programs that are, already established at the state. And so I hope that the watershed planning program might be able to shed a little bit more light on exactly how they're using the data at the basin scale to assess progress and identify gaps.
Okay, so it sounds like that analysis might be coming, like if all the extra phosphorus was put in forest land use, how are we doing? Like, how are we looking compared to other basins with our storm, some of the ag and stormwater and some of those pieces? How are we measuring up?
That's my understanding is it's the phase 4 will really look at that level of detail.
I think I'll end my questions there. I've always wondered about that. And I feel like as we go further and further into the different formulas for the formula grants or the different methodologies, like little pieces leak out about how all of it was done. And it's been really interesting. So thank you.
Other questions? I see there's some members of the public that have joined us, so I didn't know if they had questions as well. It does look like Kent has a question in the chat. I'm happy to read it if that's helpful.
Hi, Claire. As I was listening to your answers to Hillary's questions, you answered my question as I was typing it. But it has been working with the formulas and especially the phosphorus reduction loss. It has been a challenge for the watershed groups just picking projects to bring to the QUISP for funding. And I was just curious if you are seeing a difference in the investment by the specific actions, if that's being reported out and if that's being tracked, and if that's how you're picking out some of the gaps. I know early when we were coming up with the formulations, we didn't really have much of an investment in project identification. There's been a good response to that, realizing that that's a really important part, and that's something that the watershed groups have just done out of love over the last several years, and that we don't have the capacity to do that without support. So we're thankful for that support. Are there other gaps in the actions we're doing that are looking like they need more support from the tracking you're doing?
That's a great question. I think so. We do track investments. Like I said, we're pretty limited to tracking anything that is funded through a state funding source, or we're lucky that the Lake Champlain Basin Program and a couple other partners are willing to sort of participate in our data collection process each year. But we definitely don't capture everything. In terms of, so we do track sort of investments made at each phase of project work. So identification, design, implementation. As far as identifying gaps, you know, I think we can all acknowledge like there's plenty more work to be done. And the one gap that I'm seeing is providing really like streamlined, actionable mechanisms for this work to happen consistently across the basin and across the state. So I think that's a challenge. Like you said, many of small watershed groups are doing great work at a pretty local scale. And we just want to like help support tools that will allow that work to be replicable across different basins and throughout the state. So yeah, I guess that would be one gap. In terms of like other gaps that we're seeing in the data, there's a lot of work still to do to operationalize and implement the phosphorus accounting. So we have published methods, for example, for work in forest roads and trails, and are just this spring getting out a survey tool to help support partners in engaging in that work and making the tracking and the data reporting as easy as we can. So that's a low lift. And so we're sort of like building those operational tools and implementing our methods, and really trying to prioritize where we see the broadest suite of project opportunities or need. So forests, the FFI is another example, still requiring some work and development, but it is a tool that we hope will help to track a really large suite of projects that we were previously unable to account for. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but those are some thoughts off the bat.
Okay, well, it's good enough for this evening, and I'll follow up on a personal basis on a few others.
Any other questions for Claire? Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We'll give you the rest of your evening back, or you're welcome to join and listen in for the rest of the meeting, whatever your preference, but I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, all.
Thank you, Claire.
I'm okay, back to our agenda. I will say, so I do see Don McFeeters on the line. I don't know if there's as a member of the public, if he has anything he would like to share, if he's just listening in, but this is a good opportunity, Don, if you'd like to speak.
Here just to listen. I'm a member of the board of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. And so I'm interested in, I joined because I wanted to hear what was being said. I have really no questions.
Thank you so much for joining.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I'm wondering if we can approve the minutes from our last meeting, our meeting summary, and I'm just looking to see if we have a quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't think that we do. Because we need 6, right? Bob, how many do we need for a quorum?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out right now.
You need one more than a
We need-
majority.
Right.
I thought it was 7, but I have to do the math. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we definitely don't have 7. So we can table the meeting summary for our next meeting. And as far as chair updates, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit here because we skipped things. I don't have any chair updates other than to share that Denise is sorry she couldn't be here. She's having a family medical emergency, so she apologizes for that, and she's with us in spirit. As far as committee updates, there's a few things on my list that I wanted to talk about. One, maybe a quick rehash while Andrew's still here and Bob, regarding our meetings with the lieutenant governor and the governor. Last week we met with the governor, and the week before we met with the lieutenant. We shared pictures of that. I think both meetings were successful, and I didn't know if Andrew or Bob wanted to comment on anything or have advice that we can improve those meetings for the future. I thought for the most part, I felt like both the lieutenant governor and the governor were engaged, as well as Secretary Moore, and it was a good informal conversation, but we covered the basis of the action plan.
Yeah, this is Bob. I'll go real quick. Yeah, no, I thought I thought it was great. I mean, I've been on many of these, and this was as good or better as any. So yeah, I agree with everything you said. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Andrew. I'll just jump in and say that I also felt like it went well, that we had good attention from Governor Scott and Julie Moore, and actually went a little over the time allotted for us. And I mean, I think they were interested in a number of different things. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about when we were presenting is, are we presenting concrete enough actions that we think could be taken by the legislature or the administration? Or are we just really focusing on these broader themes? And are we going to be more successful by asking for if we have very specific asks? And going back to the Senate Natural Resources Committee, the specific ask we got was related to the mandatory boat decal program, which was a very specific thing that we put in there. And I said, I'm not sure that was because there was any more interest in that topic, but maybe because they said, oh, maybe that's something we could do or help out with. So just a general thought on that. But I did think the meeting with the governor went well, and I enjoyed being there.
And okay, I'll come back again quickly. So this has always been the give and take forever. I will say that it has evolved to be more reactive compared to how it was when I first started. They always want actionable items. That's all they want, really. They want like vote for H308, vote not, and that's hard for us because we only meet so often, and we have a disparate group, with different opinions. But yes, I completely agree that we're continuing to move forward, and we can always make it better. By far, we need, in my opinion, as always, we need to truncate, make it super short, super to the point. And yes, that is what they really want mostly, though, is because that's what they do, is vote on things. So that's hard for us. But yes, I agree that everything you say, and it's good to see new eyes on it and whatnot, and we can make it better. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing I meant to say is also just points of where we can celebrate success. I think the governor was the one that brought up the cessation of lake trout spawning due to the restoration of the population. And so continuing to have those good news stories to share as part of our briefings is probably good.
Yeah, and I think, you know, similarly, this tracks with just actionable items, but when we brought up South Lake access, he had ideas of land that they had looked at and wondered, you know, asked Secretary Moore why they hadn't moved forward. And so there was like a good conversation there, Hillary, about the South Lake and access, and then also just recognizing some of the, and I'm trying to remember the name of the creek that flows in up in Franklin County that's become an issue as far as sediment loading, but he brought that up as well, which was interesting because that was something that I hadn't heard of, but I can check my notes on that. Okay, well, I think those are really good points, and I do think the more we can connect on actionable pieces to our action plan, the better. One other thing that I had on my notes was the date for our retreat. I didn't see in the summary of our meeting minutes from last time when that was, and I just wanted to make sure, I think that we finally settled on a date, but I just wanted to put it in our meeting summary for tonight so that everyone had it and make sure people are blocking that time. Mary, do you have that information handy by chance?
Yes, it's June 18th.
Okay, June 18th. Thank you.
Has everyone received a hold on their calendar for that date? Because if not, we can follow up with that.
I received a bunch of holds and then some unholds, so I think it's still in there, but I'm just checking as I.
Yeah, mine's in there from
I
like
received
9 to
it.
4:30.
Okay.
Yeah, we had landed on a different date, and then we realized that it was the date of the legislative veto session, so we moved it after that. So there was a lot of calendar shuffling, but that was why.
That's perfect. And maybe, Mary, this is a request, so not a big deal if you forget, but in the next email out, just maybe I think it's good to have a reminder in the email as well of that date for the future.
Okay. Yeah, totally.
And then do we need to discuss speaker meeting topics for the next meeting? How are we doing there? Or future meetings, including the retreat?
For our May meeting, we have Evan Horn from the Climate Office coming to discuss updates to the Climate Action Plan,
Oh, great.
like we talked about in March.
Perfect.
I'd like to propose something. What if we were to have the chair of the House and the chairs of the House and Senate Natural Resources Environment Committees come to a meeting?
Oh, I love that idea. And I even wonder if we could fit that in like, as far as time, Representative Odie, do you think like the May meeting would work, or would you want it to be further out? I mean, I guess we have to find out what their availability is. But recognizing that we do have, like, these meetings are 2 hours and we often can double up on presentations, so we would have time in theory for, you know, updates from each of the chairs.
Yeah, I just think, well, let's hear what they have going on and how we can help work with them. And, you know, if they need advocacy for funding or whatever.
When does the legislative session end?
It could be May, it could be early June. So that, you know, they might want to do it while the legislature's in session. It's a few minutes in the evening on a Monday. It's not maybe not that bad, or they may prefer to wait till we're not in session.
Yeah, maybe we can see what their availability is like. And also, we do still have some planning to do for the retreat for that whole day. And I know that the intent is to have some discussion and reflection on the legislative session and priorities. So I don't know if it would make sense or be a good fit to aim for that, or just start with the invitation for May. But either way, it would be great to have, we have penciled in talking about the legislative session and upcoming priorities for the action plan, as well as I believe we'll be ready to start some discussion about any input the CAC has for research priorities for the Lake Champlain Basin Program,
I would
CAC
say-
research work.
Sorry, I think I would say invite them before our retreat so that we can hear what they're saying, so that at the retreat, we can consider that.
Great.
Yeah, I like that idea too. And if for some reason, I think we could think about the first part of the retreat as well, as if May didn't work. But let's try for May.
Can someone remind me, what's the timing of the retreat?
I think it's at like 9 to noon. I'll pull it up again.
We have the conference room at the LCBP office booked for the day.
Okay.
So I think it's like we have it for like 9 to 3. And yeah, the agenda is still being developed. So how much of that time we actually use, we can decide together.
And
Yeah.
typically it has been a full day. I was wrong about the 9 to noon thing. But not like a 3 o'clock day. Not. Okay, that's good. Do people have other questions or comments related to upcoming presentations, topics, dates, meetings? One other thing that I think we can continue to have this conversation, but I'm curious because our new representative, Carolyn Brannigan, has not joined us yet that I'm aware of. And it would be great to, I don't know if we need to make like a more concentrated effort to reach out to her. I don't know, Representative Odie, if you have connections with her, but it would be lovely for her to meet her and for her to be involved.
Sorry, for who to be involved?
Representative Carolyn Brannigan?
Yeah.
She's our new
Yeah,
our
you were wondering about what about her? I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering if you work with her directly, and if I think she's been invited to these meetings and just hasn't attended, but and I'm happy
She
to.
absolutely knows that she's about the meetings and everything. So
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I'll mention it to her tomorrow. I see her every day in the legislature. She sits across from me.
Oh, good. And I'm happy to reach out to her directly if you thought that would be effective. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And I'd like to thank Representative Odie for being so involved. We have, through my N years, we've had many involved people, and the majority have been involved, but we have had some legislatures that just never show up at all. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's so nice of you to say. I know, I come to just about everything. I even go to Canada or New York or whatever.
No, it's really helpful.
Good.
So, thank you. I don't think that I have anything more. So we can give people back time unless there are other questions or things that I'm missing.
Mary, do we have any other loose ends or logistics or questions for the group that would be helpful? Maybe as we keep plugging along, we can reach out to Karina and Denise on planning for future presentations too, based off of the planning that we already did last month.
Yeah, definitely feel free to like loop me in if you're having trouble getting hold of someone or wanting to brainstorm on filling out the agenda.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to get in touch with the chairs and see if they can come to the May meeting, and I'll let you know how that goes.
That sounds great.
And I'm sorry, did we capture a prompt and sort of what the invitation would be for what we would like them to present to the group about? Or would it be more for just an informal discussion?
I think what I heard from Representative Odie and Carol, fill me in if I got this wrong, but sort of an update on just what's been going on in their committees, important bills that we should follow or be aware of related to water quality in Lake Champlain, and then maybe how they align with our action plan or actionable items, how we can help.
Great. Thank you, Karina.
Well, with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn the meeting at 6:23.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All
I'll
those
second
in
that.
favor? Oh yeah, second. Thank you, Andrew. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi, thank you.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy the last of the sun before some rain. Spring's coming.
Good
Thanks.
night, everyone.
Thanks. Good night.